All right, well, now that we've told you about the real opportunity in bringing fashion to underserved consumers, it's important to take a step back and look at the bigger why. Here to tell us why inclusivity is good for business is Elizabeth Keenan. She is assistant professor at Harvard Business School in conversation with Alvanon's very own Janice Wang. Elizabeth, Janice, welcome to 3D Tech Fest. I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. And thank you so much, Liz, for being here today.
Of course, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
First of all, we've got to tell everybody what you actually do.
So I'm a professor in the marketing unit here at Harvard Business School, and I do research in the area of pro-social consumer behavior. And by that, what I mean is the types of behavior that extend behind the selfish motivations that we tend to have and decisions that might impact others and society in positive ways. So I specifically focus on research in the areas of environmental decision making as well as charitable giving, but I've also extended my research now into examining not just consumers' behavior, but firm behavior too, looking at firms that are both trying to do well by making money and do good by helping society. And so I developed recently in the last year a course on purpose-driven marketing in which we look at these kinds of firms and explore what challenges they face when trying to communicate the value that they're bringing to society.
Because it's all really good and well that you want to do good, right? And I think a lot of the workforce these days, they want to really do good, but there are some really interesting little challenges that come up with it. And I know that there's one bit of research that you published actually as a case study a few years ago, which was about Tommy Hilfiger.
Yes. So one of the things that we do here at Harvard Business School is we explore various firms and brands and take a look at the various challenges that they might be facing in time. And one of the ones I came across while I was building this course was Tommy Hilfiger, and specifically the Tommy Hilfiger adaptive line of clothing for people with disabilities. And so I had an opportunity to meet with the team and learn a bit about how this came about, some of the challenges they were facing, and what they were doing to tackle and move forward. It was a really inspiring case, and I learned a lot. I have so much more to learn in that space, but that ended up being something that I used for my course.
It's quite funny because actually 4 years ago, when we first met, when we and Coresight actually did that first kind of conference, that was the one thing that we actually said was we actually got to meet all of the people who did the componentry for the Tommy adaptive line, and one of them was magnets, and there when we were learning about kind of the product design of all of this, we started to realize actually that what was in our heads of what people might be looking for is not exactly the same as the user's experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. So when Tommy Hilfiger agreed to work on an adaptive line, and in fact saw the opportunity and were excited to jump into this space, they realized they had no idea where to begin, because this was, at the time, and it still seems to be, a very untapped market, and a customer who hadn't really been served well in the past. And so there was nothing to lean on, nothing to look back to and learn about best practices to then launch this line. And so they had to do a ton of basic research to understand this customer, what their needs were, where they shop, what they care about. And one thing that was super notable, and the reason they even did this, is it's, folks who have challenges with dressing, sure, there might be some basics that are easy to get on and off, but they're not always fashionable, and they want fashion, and they want to look fashionable like others. And so that was one thing. So they're a fashion brand trying to figure out that space. And then also realizing that, not all disabilities look the same. Some are very visible and others are completely invisible. And what one person needs does not mean that's what another person needs. So there's this challenge in design of figuring out how to create pieces that work for a broad swath of individuals with, fashion interest as well as basic innovation needs in terms of small adaptations, and they're not even small or minor. But I was so impressed with the various adaptations, like you said, magnets, hook and loop closures, sizing differences in terms of if you're seated all the time in a wheelchair versus standing. So fabric type. It's just I was really impressed with the progress that they made in that space and all of the adaptations that they started to innovate on and incorporate into their clothing.
Ultimately, actually, it's about the authenticity, I guess, of what they were trying to create. And I mean, the amount of work that went into that was just, it's actually quite mind-boggling, as well as the fact that it, how do I put this? It's not standard, right? You can't, it's really, and actually it's one of the problems that I think that we've had in, working with trying to figure out how to make, for instance, a mannequin of this to actually be able to test things, is because we don't know about muscle deformities or how actually it's going to work, because every single case is a little bit different. So actually, as a retailer, how do you accommodate for all of these variances and still not be making custom clothing but still be able to offer a line? And there must be a very interesting distribution mechanism there.
Sure, I'm sure there is. I mean, the one thing I did observe that Tommy Hilfiger was doing is they didn't just decide what was needed, but they actually involved the customer in the design. And so one of the first meetings I had with them was participating in a workshop in which they were meeting with potential customers, people with disabilities, to learn from them about what are some of the challenges you face when dressing and how might we be able to adapt our clothing in a way that fits and helps in that space. And it turns out that there are some changes you could make that would help across the board. And you have to just, you need to speak to people. You need to start to do your research. And that was one thing that really struck me with what Tommy Hilfiger did, was they worked hard to get to know what their customer was like, what they needed, and listened. They really listened.
And if we got like the stat from Coresight's part, where they're saying there's a lot of people who cross by because they find that part they find adaptive clothing, and they'll cross by into the other the more the main lines.
They
really.
They do. And Tommy found that too. Tommy Hilfiger has found that, they have the adaptive customer, but the adaptive customer is not just purchasing in the adaptive line, but they are also purchasing from their main line. And so, it was drawing in customers, new customers who Tommy hadn't had before, coming because of the adaptive line and then crossing over.
And it's particularly interesting because PVH is a company that has many different geographical locations.
Mm-hmm.
That this came out of the US, and which is normally not kind of the way in the PVH. A lot of the innovation comes out
Right. A
of
lot
Europe.
of these innovations would start at headquarters, and this one generated here in the US at the US headquarters. And I think one of the reasons it took off the way it did is because it did start with this smaller team here. There's a ton of passion behind it, and they built it to a point at which they could start to then expand into Europe. And so it was a different way to go about it and hadn't happened before. So that was new for them, but also they were very invested.
So, I mean, the distribution part where, we previously talked about actually links back to a different case which is where I actually found all of the work that you had done, which is the Bombas case.
Mm-hmm.
And just for everybody who's listening, there is the extra credit part where, people have asked me to put on there. So the extra credit part is listening to the podcast that Keenan has done with Brian Kenny on HBR's Cold Call. Which is it's a really interesting podcast anyway. But there's some real key items that came out of that. Is first of all, who's Bombas?
So Bombas is a buy one, give one sock company. So they have what we would call a BOGO model, where for every pair purchased, a pair of socks is donated to a homeless shelter. So the founders of Bombas had come across a statistic that stated the number one requested item in homeless shelters here in the US is socks. Socks are not donated to shelters. They typically can't be accepted for any number of reasons. Socks wear through quickly. And so most people, if you're at the stage of wanting to donate a pair of socks, they probably have many holes in them and other things, and, sanitation reasons and whatnot. And so socks are really needed. And so they came across that. And then they also recognized that there was space for innovation in socks, right? Performance socks had been around for years. Athletes and whatnot, hikers, folks in the outdoor space, there are performance socks, but the everyday sock hadn't been innovated on in years. And so they thought, what if we could take some of the innovations we've been using in the performance sock industry and apply them to everyday wear socks. And so that's what they did. So they innovated on everyday wear socks, reminding people that, guess what, your feet deserve to feel good every day. And so they innovated in the space of socks, but they also innovated in the space of homelessness and serving a very direct need, and put the two together. And so, I think at this point they've donated over 50 million pairs of socks since their inception, and it's a really beautiful design and model for the company.
It's 50 million pairs of socks, which, I don't want to say this, but it's a logistical nightmare as far as anybody's concerned.
Right. So if you think about it, every pair of sock they sell, every pair of sock that gets sold, they then need to find a place to donate a pair of socks. In the early days, it was really interesting because they had some of their first sales and then they had socks and they thought, well, we have to donate socks now. How? We know we need to donate. We know where we're going to donate. We know where it's needed, but how do we donate socks? And so they had to do some research and start to figure out a little bit about, the space of homelessness and how to donate them to homeless shelters. And so it was a little bit of a very steep learning curve for them. But yeah, they got to a stage. So one thing that's really interesting about these buy one, give one models is that it's this two-sided model, and you effectively have two businesses going on at the same time. You're managing a commercial business and you're managing a social business, and the success of one is inextricably linked to the success of the other. So as they succeed in selling socks, they're going to have a lot more to donate, and it becomes this logistical challenge of trying to figure out how to distribute. They have 3,500 giving partners that they're working with, and these giving partners apply. It's not an intense application process, but they apply, they get vetted, they're chosen. There's a waiting list now. And so they have to figure out how to get that out. But what's interesting about both Tommy and Bombas is this, in Tommy's case, they jumped into the social space, and they effectively had a startup within their business that they were working on. And in here, you're looking at two businesses simultaneously being managed. So that's Bombas.
But I mean, it's also an interesting thing because Bombas, and it's expanded into other categories. I mean, it's expanded into underwear, it's expanded into t-shirts. I mean, it's all the stuff that actually we don't actually ever think about the needy as a category, right?
Yes.
I can't even begin to think about how we collect the data on that either, in terms of like, I mean, and this is something I guess for us to have a little think about later, but I mean, like, even just think about the sizing that actually needs to go into, what you actually need to donate, because it's not immediate that, somebody who is in a homeless shelter is going to be, malnourished, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not exactly, there's all these other things that we actually have to take into account, which at some point, we have to think about, because this is
I think one thing they did is you think about it, you do the research, but you rely on your partners, and that's something that both Tommy and Bombas also did very well. Is they didn't do this alone. So Tommy researched and got to know the customer, but they also partnered with organizations that worked in the space of disabilities, and Bombas similarly, they partnered with these homeless shelters. And so a lot of the recipients of their donations work hand in hand with them and help them learn. And in fact, Bombas works hard to indoctrinate every single employee that joins their organization to better understand what it means to be homeless. And so the new hires are handed pairs of socks, and they're told, go find somebody that needs these and hand them out. And almost every single time that employee says, wow, I had no idea. I did this with my students when I taught the Bombas case. So Bombas actually sent some of the donation socks to us, handed them out. And then I had students running back to me saying, do you have more? Because, when they handed a pair of socks to somebody out there, that person's like, how did you know this is what I needed? And so it's really important for everybody to start to understand the space that's in the organization. And Bombas continues to work with these partners to keep up to date on both what the needs are, but then logistically, they learn a little bit about what sizes are needed and colors, right? The socks are darker because they don't get cleaned as often. Antimicrobial features have been incorporated into these socks. The heel's been reinforced so that it doesn't wear through and holes are created. So it's a matter of actually recognizing what you do know and also very much recognizing what you don't know and talk to those that do.
And it's empathetic response, right? The funny thing the way, about a couple of weeks ago, I took one of my teenage daughter actually on a walk to the homeless in Hong Kong, which is, you don't expect much homelessness in Hong Kong, but we actually have a lot. And it was a true kind of conversation with this NGO about, how do you actually treat everybody with respect?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not, you have, it doesn't come across immediate, right? That, you have to look them in the eye, talk to them if they talk to you. Some of them might not want to talk to you. There is a kind of method, and you only experience that when you actually do it.
Right. So like in the case of Tommy, just because I have a disability doesn't mean I don't want to look good. Exactly. And in the case of Bombas, just because I am without shelter right now doesn't mean I am not a person just like you. And there's a lot of misinformation and misunderstanding of why people are sometimes without shelter, and the stigma follows. And so people's interactions and just the assumptions that are based on why you're out there. And so, yes, understanding and actually being there really does make a difference.
I love that you took the students to go do that, because actually one of the big things that we've got now is a very empathetic or wanting to do good Gen Z entering the workforce. It was like something 30% of the workforce is going to be Gen Z by 2025.
Yeah, over 30%. Yep. And so it's very notable, especially, since COVID, there is a lot of shifting around of organizations where people are moving and quitting their jobs and trying to find a job that means something to them. And so I think that it's important to recognize that this up and coming generation is looking to work for companies who they feel good about working for. They're both treated well, of course, paid well, and are motivated and challenged in their day-to-day job, but also they're looking for something even more, which is making a difference and feeling like they're having impact and doing something that matters. And so these sort of what we would call purpose-driven firms that are both trying to make survive and do well, also to be doing good. And that really ends up helping to attract a talented workforce. And right now, there is a rush on talent, and it's hard to find good talent. I think this is something that firms are challenged with these days. And so having purpose gives you an edge.
And I think that edge is much needed, right? Because it actually, it creates a better product that's out there. And B, back to all your sustainability work that you actually, environmental practice work that you also did earlier in your career. I mean, these kinds of things all are coming to the forefront. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I don't want to put it like this. The term kind of ESG is way too kind of broad, actually, in a certain way. But it's actually just the caring element, right? That the authentic caring element that some of these companies may have to, start to embrace, because for many years we either greenwashed or we kind of glossed over it. Mm-hmm. It was a marketing thing.
Right.
And so, in purpose-driven marketing, I guess it's what you're teaching is real authenticity, right? In the operational part of what
Right.
you actually do.
Right, absolutely. If you were to ask me, and I know this was one of the questions coming, and I'm gonna jump in and just provide the answer. So I know one of the last things you wanted to ask was, what, like, if I were to leave people with a final thought and what to take away from these cases that I've written. Engaging in purpose and having social impact, there was a time at which that was a differentiator.
Yes.
There was a time when you had some cause marketing campaign, or that you were, engaging in a buy one, give one model. That was a differentiator enough. But too many organizations are now engaged in that for good reason, because they should be. But because so many are doing it, that's no longer a differentiator. But what is the care with which you execute on that model, whatever that model is. And that's where it comes back to the authenticity and the importance of ensuring that this isn't just glossing over, but you getting to know and engaging deeply in the issue, connecting it back to the core of what your organization represents, and really making it part of the DNA.
And I just want to thank you for that, because I truly do think that fashion companies need to embrace that part of it. I mean, it's we have to recognize that we're in a totally different world, and this is for the better. This really is, and we can all be a part of that, improvement. So thank you so much for your time today. I mean, it's been wonderful speaking to you, and I hope to see much more of your work coming forward in some of these firms.
You're welcome. Thank you for including me. It's been great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.